All right. This is exciting. I was talking to Dr. Lucan a little bit, and apparently if I pass out, I'll be the first one to do so in the history of preaching. So I'd like to thank my teachers. They've been a spiritual pillars of this school. The school has convictions that it was founded on, and without the teachers, that would just crumble. And they play a very vital part of this school, and I appreciate that. I'd also especially like to thank Pastor Camp. He's been a big part of my life. Without him, I wouldn't be here today. He's my pawpaw, for those of y'all who don't know. So, yeah. There's many others I could thank, but that's not why I'm here today. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into what God has burdened me with. We do have to write two sermon outlines. I need to explain something quick. We have to write two sermon outlines for Preacher and His Ministries. And one of the assigned passages is James 4. And it just so happens my passage today is James 4. That was completely coincidental. I was thinking and meditating on this passage before Christmas, but so it just so happens that it's the same passage. So with that said, James 4, if you could turn to James 4, we're going to be looking at the first 10 verses. And when I was younger, I was probably 5 or 6 years old, I used to play basketball. I was on a basketball team. And I remember one time we were playing a game, and I got the ball. And so I was, trying to get to the goal. There's nobody in front of me. There's nobody in between me and the goal. There's just a clear shot towards the goal. So I'm dribbling. I'm going as fast as I can. Everybody's cheering me on. I'm really excited. I shoot, and I made a basket, and that was impressive for me because I'm not very athletic, and I wasn't very good at basketball. So I'm really excited. I just scored. I look at the scoreboard, and the other team gets 2 points. And turns out I had shot into my own goal and scored against my own team. And everybody who was yelling and cheering for me was actually telling me that I was going the wrong way. And I didn't realize that. I was a kid. Now, someone might would have said that something like this. They could have said something like this, what are you doing? Whose side are you on anyway? That would have kind of been a mean thing to say to a 5-year-old kid, but it would have been warranted somewhat. I was helping the other team. Now, I did that unintentionally, but some of us might be, you might be intentionally playing for the other team in the spiritual life. And so my title for today is, Whose Side Are You On Anyway? There's one thing I want you to get today, and that is, you must realize that you cannot be a carnal Christian and be effective to God. James 4:10, I'm going to read James 4, the first 10 verses. From whence comes wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence, even of your lust that war in your members? Ye lust and have not, ye kill and desire to have, and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not, because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lust. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whoso therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. Do you think that the Scripture saith in vain, the Spirit that dwelleth in us lusteth to envy? But he giveth more grace. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Be afflicted, and mourn, and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to heaviness. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up. I'm not going to pray today just at the beginning because I only have 20 minutes. But believe me, I've been praying about this for a while now. So just starting right at the first verse, it says, From whence comes wars and fightings among you? Wars and fightings, these words are very strong words that James is using. They carry the idea of armed combat. They're military words, battle, fighting, fighting with weapons. So it's very strong words, and he's making a point. There's conflict, there's contention here. And then he's saying, where did they come from? Come they not hence, even of your lust that war in your members. So it's the fruit of an inward battle. It's and I want to look at this inner conflict. I have 4 points today. They all start with the letter U. So. First one is unsecured satisfaction, verses 1 through 3. It says, even of your lust that war in your members. That word lust means desires for pleasure. Now, pleasure isn't bad necessarily of itself, but all 5 times that this word is used, it carries the idea of a fleshly desire, a fleshly pleasure. So we see that war in your members, that's internal, that's the desires of your flesh. Verse 2, it says, you lust and have not. So you're seeking, you're trying to obtain this, but you're not getting it. It says, you kill and desire to have and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you have not because you ask not. There's a desire, there's a seeking, but it is not coming to fruition. It kind of reminds me of cotton candy. Cotton candy is this big fluffy stuff, but when you bite into it, there's nothing there. It doesn't satisfy. And the words, you kill, you fight, desire to have. You're not stopping at anything in your pursuit for your desires, but it's not producing anything. It's verse 2, a little further down, says, you have not because you ask not, and we're not praying. But then verse 3, it clarifies that too. You do pray, you ask, but you still receive not because you ask amiss that you may consume it on your lust. God doesn't bless selfish, fleshly prayers. Psalm 66:18 says, if I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me. Fleshly desires will never be satisfied. Proverbs 27:20 says, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. I'll make a little bit of personal application. You know your flesh. You know what your natural spirit is. And your flesh is never going to tell you, all right, that's enough serving me. Go ahead and serve God now. Your flesh is never going to say that. It's always going to be demanding your attention. It's always going to be demanding that you serve it. Now, unsecured satisfaction stems from an unratified relation. Look at verse 4. It says, ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whoso therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. What do you think of when you think of friendship? I looked up the definition, and there's several different definitions, but it carries the idea of a mutual affection, a liking, an attraction. I've thought about just, the different friendships I've made, and most of the time you have a common interest. How many of y'all really like football? Just love football. How many of y'all really like to talk to other people about football who also like football? Pretty much all the same people. So, I don't really care a thing about football. I didn't even know who was playing I didn't even know the game was playing until the night of, and I didn't even know who was playing. So I have no desire for football, but that you make friendships, you make those connections with common interests. And friendship with the world is a common interest of the world, and we know the world is opposed to God. The word friendship here is the same word that we get the idea of brotherly love. So there's a comfortableness, there's a common interest that we shouldn't have with the world. Most people aren't friends with people they don't like. If you don't have anything in common, you don't have anything that you can relate on. If you just don't like the person, you're not going to just be their friend. So a little more personal application. There are things in the world that Christians have no business being a part of. Explicit sexual content in movies, video games, songs, books. There's no explanation. There's no allowance for that. We can't have both. There's things in the world that are fine, like water park, there's slides. There's nothing wrong with going down a slide with water going through it. But a Christian should never be at a place like that unless you can work it out to where your youth group's going somehow. And but there's some things you're going to have to deny yourself about, even though in and of itself it's okay. Romans 8:6-7 talk about the carnal mind being death and enmity with God. The carnal mind can't please God. Matthew 6:24 says, you cannot serve God and mammon. I am saying the wrong section. Sorry, let me back up real quick. Romans 12:2 says, be not conformed to this world. Matthew 16:24 says, let him deny himself. You're going to have to deny yourself pleasures that are worldly. Now, what does befriending the world lead to? The rest of the verse says, friendship with the world is enmity with God. Whoso therefore will be the friend of the world is the enemy of God. So now we have an undesired disposition. Disposition means a quality of character. And what I'm focusing on specifically is enmity. That the word enmity means adamantly and actively opposed and hostile towards an individual. When you follow the desires of your flesh and befriend the world, you have set yourself as the enemy of God, hostile towards God. It says, whosoever will be, that word has the idea of a desire, a wanting. You're wanting to be the friend of the world. And it says, will be the friend of the world is the enemy of God. The word isn't just your, it means to be set, to be established, and it's passive, which means that it is not your doing, it is being done to you. So when you will to be the friend of the world, that's your decision. You can just decide to be the friend of the world. But outside of your will, you are then set and established as the enemy of God. What do you think of when you think of an enemy? It's someone that you are adamantly opposed towards. You hate them. You may desire to harm them. You're opposed to what they want, they believe. You're targeting God with that enmity. That's fellowship is broken. Look at the first few words in verse 4. Ye adulterers and adulteresses. That's really strong language that James is using. He's condemning them of spiritual adultery, basically, and that's what befriending the world is. We're the bride of Christ if you're a believer, and defrauding God of what belongs of Him by befriending. We're flirting with the world. We can't flirt with the world. Verse 6 says, the middle part of verse 6 says, wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. That word resisteth is another military term. It means to set against, to be at war against, you're digging your trench in opposition towards the enemy. That's what you set yourself against when you are befriending the world. You set yourself as the enemy of God. Are you an enemy of God? If you're friends with the world, then you have already been set in opposition to the Almighty God of the universe. Now that should scare you, that you would oppose an all-powerful God. But we don't have to stay that way. The passage goes on. So for my fourth point, we have unrestrained reconciliation. God is not preventing you from reconciling with Him. Sometimes we think, once you become an enemy, then there's no reconciliation. But God is willing to take back even those who have become His enemy. Look at verse 6. It says, but He giveth more grace. Wherefore God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace to the humble. God knows that it's hard. We do need grace. Verse 5 says, the spirit that dwelleth in us lusteth to envy. God understands that we're human and that we need His help. But He's not going to give it to you if you're proud. If you think that you can make it on your own, you're wrong, and God doesn't. God resisteth the proud. It's easy to be prideful, but we have to realize that we don't got it. We don't have the ability to be the kind of Christians that we need to be. We need God's grace, and it starts with humility. God's not going to give you the grace you need until you decide to humble yourself. And that's a personal decision. Verse 7 continues this idea. Submit yourself, therefore, to God. Submit has the idea of arranging under someone else's authority, that being the authority of God. Submitting yourself. You put yourself down, and you're putting yourself under someone else. You're submitting your desires, your wants, your flesh to what God would have you do. Continuing, it says, draw nigh to God and He will draw nigh to excuse me. Draw nigh to God and He will draw nigh to you. That's we have to be doing our part, and God will do His part. Cleanse your heart, cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your your. I'm going to drink some water here. My mouth is very dry. I'm sorry. He says, ye cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. These are strong words again. Sinners, double-minded. But that's what he's trying to get your attention, and I'm trying to get your attention. We can't be carnal Christians. We can't be meddling with the world and think we can do, be a great Christian. Verse 8 says, verse 9 says, be afflicted and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to heaviness. Now, I don't think this verse is saying that we should never laugh or be happy. But your false joy, your false happiness that you have in your flesh, that should crumble away as you realize the situation that you're in. Being opposed to God, and your flesh is never going to satisfy. The true satisfaction only comes from God. Verse 10, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and He shall lift you up. Again, it's back to humility. If you humble yourself, then God can do His part in lifting you up to have the strength to oppose your flesh, be the kind of Christian you need to be. So just quickly, just recapping, your fleshly desire will never satisfy. It will never be satisfied. It's always going to demand more. And friendship with the world is completely unacceptable by the Bible, and then it sets you as the enemy of God. But there's a chance for restoration. Remember, it starts with humility. God will not extend the grace needed if you're trying to do your own thing. We don't have the strength. We don't got it. We have to rely on God. You can't be a carnal Christian and be effective to God. You need to realize just how serious of a situation you're in. Being opposed to God. That should break your heart, or at least scare you. That you have the will to oppose God like that. It's really foolish, and I've been there, but it never works out. You're never going to be able to be an effective Christian for God if you think you can flirt with the world and still maintain your relationship with God. So I ask you, do you really want to be the enemy of God today? Whose side are you on? Whose side are you on anyway?